Game week 24 has been pretty kind to me so far. I'm sitting on 92 points in 30k overall. I'm obviously well aware that there's plenty of game week 24 left to go and a long time until the game week 25 deadline, but I feel like there's already loads to talk about, so I'm going to go through my transfer plans in this video. So a quick check-in then on how my team is shaping up so far in game week 24. I've had Salah as my captain. Notice I've not got the captain sign next to him. He scored 32 points, 2 goals for him. Very happy with my captaincy shout. I already used my triple captain. I used it on Haaland early on against Ipswich. So I was there was no debate for me. You know, some people had a small debate, I guess, between whether to deploy their triple captain on Salah or go for the assistant manager. I went for the assistant manager. I didn't actually have enough cash in the bank, number one, to get Arnie's slot. And I also already had 3 Liverpool players. So I would have to sell one of my Liverpool players in order to fund getting Arnie's slot in. Whereas I could have gotten David Moyes in without using a transfer. And I was always of the mind, and this will come into play later on in the video when we talk about who I'm going to move Moyes onto. I was always of the mind that using the assistant manager chip on a manager who could potentially get table bonus, just with the sheer amounts of points that were available for doing that, was the right play. And I thought Moyes' set of fixtures were almost perfect for that. Leicester at home. With the form that Everton were in under Moyes, I backed them to win that game, and obviously they did. And then Liverpool, it being the last Merseyside derby at Goodison Park, I just felt that Everton could get a result in that game. We'll obviously wait and see what happens. Then we got over a week until that game actually takes place. But right now, pretty happy with David Moyes and is my assistant manager. Sells and Aina in my defence. You can see there's Sells in goal. Aina on 6 points. Both obviously keeping a clean sheet and a 7-0 win against Brighton. I don't think anyone could have foreseen them winning 7-0. And to be honest, I was actually a little bit worried about starting 2 Nottingham Forest defenders. Just with the form they were in their last couple of games, I was a little bit concerned, but yeah, very glad to see them get a clean sheet. Sal's got a bit of bonus as well. Lewis Hall, disappointing result for Newcastle, both for him and for Isak, losing, of course, to Fulham. I have Robinson there on my bench, but overall, going back, I would never have started Robinson over Hall, I think, with Hall being the home team. Newcastle usually being pretty good at St James's Park. Yeah, I'm glad I went with Hall. It just is what it is in terms of the points. Trent, 6-pointer, got subbed off. Well, Bournemouth didn't score, but he got subbed early with an injury. Looks like it could either be a quad pull or a strain. I don't know. I think it's dubious as to whether if that's the right word to use, as to whether he'll start the derby. But I think he'll probably be back in time for game week 25. I mean, I'll take my 6 points. It is what it is. Rodgers, he's beginning to disappoint me a little bit. I know he scored a hat-trick in the Champions League, right? But 3 Premier League games in a row, he's picked up 3 yellow cards. Pretty petty crap ones as well, if I'm completely honest with you. And he's amounted less than 0.1 XG, I believe, in all of those games. So he's not looked very dangerous, and he's picked up a yellow card in every game. But Villa do potentially have a double game week in 25. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail when I look at my future plans. Palmer's yet to play against West Ham. That's the Monday night game. Hopeful for something there. In Bumo, I never saw Tottenham winning that game, to be honest. And I certainly didn't see Brentford not scoring. I'm just going to double check because the game's just finished as the time I'm recording this video. I'm just going to check live on air that they haven't scored. No, they got beat 2-0. So I was quite surprised to see Brentford not scoring that game, to be honest. Mo Salah spoke about him. Gakpo, I'll take the assist. I hope he starts the Everton game. Obviously, lots of football between now and then. Disappointing for Isak not to score, or Newcastle not to obviously get a result against Fulham. And then a Chris Wood hat-trick. I said this on a buy and avoid video about Chris Wood, but I do think there are circumstances where selling Chris Wood going into Game Week 24 was a smart move. Potentially selling him for Cody Gakpo, with obviously Gakpo having maybe 2 double game weeks, depending on how Liverpool get on in the Cup. And also maybe for Wissa, if you needed to free up the cash. I think Wissa's fixtures certainly over the longer term are better, and there's not much, if I'm honest, to separate the two in my mind from like open play underlying data. But for me, there was no reason to get rid of him. You know, it was a very, very luxury move if I was to. So, yeah, I kept him in my team and have been rewarded with a hat-trick. So, yeah, as I said in the intro, 92 points, 30k overall. So I went through this in my buy and avoid video, but we have a potential, obviously, it's not a potential, it's going to happen. We're going to have a double game week in Game Week 25, right? And it's dependent on the results in the cup games. And what I've got here is some betting data from Rob T FPL. So he has basically converted the betting odds for the scenarios of the games happening in the cup to the percentage likelihood of each team doubling in 25, basically. So we've got Villa and Liverpool, the most likely two teams to double in 25. They're a 60.3% likelihood. Fulham and Spurs, 25%. And there's also chances that 4 teams could double. So Villa and Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea, if they could double, they got a 10% chance of doing that. Fulham, Spurs, Arsenal, Chelsea have a 4% chance of doing that. And just a reminder as to the fixtures each team would have if they double. This is really important when I'm thinking about my early transfer plans. Obviously, I can't lock in any of these transfer plans ahead of the cup games happening because we don't know who's going to double yet. But I thought it'd be worth talking through it and what I'm planning to do with my team regardless. So Aston Villa potentially have a double against Ipswich, and then Liverpool. Liverpool have a potential double against Wolves and Aston Villa. Chelsea have Brighton, potentially Arsenal. Arsenal, Leicester, Chelsea. Fulham, Forest, Tottenham, and Spurs, Man United, Fulham. Obviously, we need to see how the Game Week 24 cup games play out. Obviously, they're not part of FPL Game Week 24, but they're happening over the course of 24. You know what I mean? And I'll first up, because I've got Moyes in, I don't think if there's going to be a double in 25, there's any reason to keep hold of Moyes. I think I'm going to use my transfer on my assistant manager. And there's 3 potential assistant managers I could go for. Number 1, I'm kind of stuck on budget as well. I can just about afford get up to Ange Postecoglou and Marco Silva if I need to. But I quite like the thought of going for Unai Emery. I know they've just had a really disappointing result against Wolves in the Premier League, but that was obviously off the back of a big Champions League fixture. And Villa always seem to be on a little bit of a downer after a Champions League fixture. We're not talking about Aston Villa assets in the game assets in the game. We're talking about their manager. I like their chances of beating Ipswich. I think there's some points there. And I also, again, similar to Everton and David Moyes, I think with the style of play that Villa can adopt, they've got players that can run in behind and cause problems on the counter-attack. They obviously did that against Arsenal at the Emirates earlier on in the season. Well, I say earlier on in the season, a few game weeks ago. Ollie Watkins, I think, ran the Arsenal defence a bit ragged on the counter-attack. He's currently, potentially injured, so we'll see how that kind of plays out. But if Ollie Watkins is fit, Villa sign the players that they're likely to. I think Rashford's through the door. They could go for Asensio. They've got Leon Bailey. They've got Marlon. All of these players are real pace merchants running in behind. And I do think they could do a bit of a job on Liverpool. I think they could give them a tough game. So I quite like the thought of using it on Emery to get the points against Ipswich, which I think is a likely, I wouldn't say guaranteed, no win in the Premier League is guaranteed, but a likely win for Aston Villa there against Ipswich, and then a punt against Liverpool where you could chase the table bonus, similar to the logic of using the assistant manager on David Moyes. So thinking assistant managers, moving it from Moyes, I'm looking potentially at Unai Emery. Right, so here's how my team is looking if I make no transfers going into Game Week 25. So scores on the doors, I got 3 free transfers and 0.6 million in the bank. And I'm in quite a fortunate position where I've got good coverage of players who could potentially have a double game week. So if you remember the list of potential teams to double, Villa, Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal, Fulham, Spurs, I've got decent coverage of all of those teams in my FPL team, right? There's a few that I might be missing, chiefly among which is from Aston Villa. I feel like alongside Liverpool, well, I don't feel like they are the most likely team to have a double game week, right? So I've got Morgan Rogers in from Villa at the moment. And to be honest, my patience, if he didn't have a potential double game week in 25, I'd be considering maybe offloading him for someone like Justin Cliver or Ouattara. But given he's got a potential double, no justification to get rid of him. And I think there's another Villa player that I've potentially got my eye on, and that's Ollie Watkins. And I look at the fixtures that Newcastle have coming up. Man City away, Nottingham Forest and Liverpool, and a potential double game week for Ollie Watkins, who is the Villa, hopefully now, the Villa penalty taker. He took the last one, albeit he slipped in the Champions League. I do quite like the thought of going from Isak to Ollie Watkins. So that could potentially be a move I make if Aston Villa are doubling. Those are really the only 2 players that I'm personally interested in from Aston Villa. What I'm also a little bit worried about for both Watkins and Rodgers is the sheer amount of players that they've signed this January window. They've all been attackers. There's only so many spots for them to occupy. So I think the Marcus Rashford deal's over the line now by the looks of it. It looks like Marco Asensio is either really close or happened. And they obviously bought Donyell Marlin from Borussia Dortmund. They also have Rodgers, Ramsey, don't have Buendia anymore, do they? Leon Bailey. They've got so many players to play those positions. So I would just be a little bit concerned about Watkins in Rodgers' minutes. But for the time being, I'm obviously happy with Morgan Rodgers. And yeah, could potentially do Ollie Watkins in for Isak. Outside of that, the other two teams that I think have a potential double, well, I'd want to plan for to have a double game week, is Fulham. I've obviously got Anthony Robinson in my team already, so I'll count my lucky stars on that one. But Raul Jimenez having a double game week is quite exciting as well. It's just whether, well, I guess if Raul Jimenez, if you just look at the odds again, sorry, I'm taking you around loads of screens. If Raul Jimenez has a double game week, it means that Cody Gakpo does not. So I could potentially go from Cody Gakpo to Raul Jimenez with my transfer, if that makes sense. That's obviously if Fulham have that double game week. I've already got Anthony Robinson in my team. The other assets you could pick from Fulham, Leno, Anderson, Iwobi, Castagna, sure. Not for me, though. I think Raul Jimenez and Robinson are the only two. Obviously, Muniz is doing good stuff off the bench. But I don't think I could ever pick the Fulham bench striker. I think you got to go for the starter in Raul Jimenez, who, by the way, is obviously also on penalties. And the other team I'd want to somewhat make a plan for is potentially Tottenham as well. And I think, to be honest, if Tottenham have a double game week, which will happen if Villa don't, I can afford both Marco Silva and Ange Postecoglou as the assistant manager. So I will probably move to one of those. And then it's just a case of, do I actually want to pick up any Spurs players? They've just beaten Brentford 2-0, to be fair. I kind of, in my buy and avoid video where I went through Spurs assets that I'd want to buy in FPL, I said, if they don't have their two centre-backs back, I would not back them to beat anyone. And they've just gone and beaten Brentford 2-0 at the G-Tech, which is no mean feat. I think the good assets from Spurs, the ones I'd really want to pick in my team, are Son and Kulusevski. Son's not had his best season by any stretch of the imagination this year. Kulusevski has probably been Tottenham's best attacker. And maybe you could also consider Richarlison, if obviously with Solanke being out as well. But I think Richarlison's been a little bit up and down in terms of his fitness this season, just in general form and favourability under Ange. So I think Son and Kulusevski are the two potential Spurs players that I might go for. But then I just look back at my team. Sorry, that's not my team. That's my team. Who do I replace to get one of them in? I've obviously got Rodgers and Semenyo, who are too cheap to replace with one of Son or Kulusevski. And I've got Mbumo, who I think long-term is probably worth keeping hold of as well. So yeah, if that were to play out in that scenario, I'd probably actually just go for Ange Postecoglou. So I've got a little bit of Spurs coverage, but if Spurs do have a double game week, I've got to say, I'm not all that interested in their assets. So that's kind of my thinking in terms of how the double game week is potentially looking for me based on the most likely scenarios of teams to double. So that being Villa, Liverpool, Tottenham, Fulham. Those are the four teams I think are most likely to double. And that's kind of my plans around bringing in their assets if they do. All right, well, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed that and found it useful. I know there's still a bit of football to go, cup games to happen, etc., etc. But I couldn't leave you hanging in terms of FPL content. And it's good to get an idea out there. You know, I'm not locking in that transfer plan at all, but I think it's a good idea to plan for, you know, your perceived most likely scenario to play out. And that's kind of what I've done with my team here. So yeah, I'm 30k overall, decent rank. I thought people might be interested in seeing my thoughts around what I'm going to do with my team. So if you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave me a like rating. Again, let me know. I didn't say this before, but you know what I mean. Let me know in the comments if there are any other changes you'd make to my team based on what I've said there. And if you haven't already, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the Golden Goal channel, which should be just about there on your screen. I'd also like to apologise. I recorded the first half of this video accidentally in 720p, so the quality might kind of improve halfway through the video. That's nothing to do with your laptop or thing. That's me recording, so apologies for that. I'll catch you in my next video.